Thanks everyone for coming on a Sunday morning after the Saturday night. Really appreciate it. So this is a conversation we hope about the future of AI. My name's Graham Morrison. I'm a writer here at Canonical. I've been writing about Linux for a long time. I think my first experience with AI was Eliza on a Commodore Amiga. And I think 30 years ago at university, we were talking about assumption-based truth maintenance systems and neural networks. And I think the proliferation of capabilities in compute have really pushed things quickly in the last few years. And I think that's the kind of thing we're going to talk about. I actually asked ChatGPT what you would ask a panel of AI experts to introduce themselves. And I also added that suited to an audience of Ubuntu Linux users who may have a more critical or skeptical view about AI. And this is what ChatGPT says. Welcome, everyone, to this exciting discussion on the convergence of open source and AI. We know that Ubuntu Linux users often have discerning and critical perspectives. To kick things off, I'd like to ask our panelists to share their personal journeys into the world of open source and AI, with a focus on the challenges and ethical considerations that they've encountered along the way. How have you navigated the intersection of open source principles and AI landscape while addressing the concerns of users who value privacy and transparency? I think that's a big question, but I thought maybe we could go through each of you and you could introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about how you got into AI, and we can take it from there. Maybe start with Craig here at the end.
So hello, my name is Craig Loewen. I'm a product manager at Microsoft. I'm the product manager for the Windows subsystem for Linux, and my team's charter is making development great on the Windows operating system. And a key component of that is infusing AI into developer workflows. So a lot of the work that I'm doing nowadays is how we can build AI tools to make developing software easier. Thanks. I'll pass over to Frank.
Thanks a lot. Frank Karlitschek from Nextcloud. We are the open source alternative to Microsoft 365. Sorry for that. And I think AI is something we do like for a long time, but of course it's accelerated the last 12 months. So like a year ago when ChatGPT came out, I was a bit depressed because I thought, okay, this is nothing where the open source community can compete. But actually it turns out a bit differently now, and there's a lot that open source can do. And nowadays we have all this nice open source AI systems integrated into Nextcloud, and yeah, I'm happy that there's still an alternative to big tech.
Hello everyone, good morning. I'm Pablo, I'm CEO at Penpot, an open source design and prototyping tool for both designers and developers. And my journey in open source starts in 1997, that's a long journey. In AI in particular, I think it was 2015 when I was building computer vision, ML-enabled products, and also signal processing, also ML-powered signal processing. Now, you know, on Penpot, we're actually having open source AI challenges because we understand that this dual nature between a visual artifact and a code artifact, which is a design using open standards, is quite a challenge for AI these days, but it's also an opportunity if you use open source AI.
Hello everyone, I'm Andreea Munteanu, MLOps product manager at Canonical. I started with AI in university. Everyone told me it's not going to fly, so I was quite stubborn, and here I am nowadays. We're looking after infra to build AI projects.
Hello everyone, my name is Juan Luis. I'm product manager at QuantumBlack, which is part of McKinsey and Company. But I've been a developer for all my life, and I've been very involved in the Python community, especially in Spain. I co-founded the Python Spain nonprofit, organized the first 7 PyCon editions in Spain. And I came to AI just by chance. I've been working with intersection of Python, data, open source for a very long time, and I've been teaching students how to apply machine learning, the classical type. And I spend too much time on LinkedIn and formerly on Twitter as well, so I'm very exposed to, you know, influencers and things like that. So I've been starting to grow a little bit critical of the whole AI movement and so on. So looking forward to participating in the panel.
Thank you. So this question, actually, we've shared a document between ourselves and we shared some questions that we'd like to cover. The idea is that we try and have an informal conversation about AI. But to start off with, this is actually a question that Pablo proposed. And it's, how can open source streamline the benefits of a surge in academic research? So maybe you'd like to start off with your thoughts on this, Pablo.
Yeah, I think a lot of people underestimate the enormous pressure there is at the moment in academia to publish the research. Like universities and research centers all around the world do need to show off what they are building. And that, by design, has to be open to the public. So if you know that, if you're aware of the fact that not only big corporations, but actually universities and research centers have this enormous pressure for PhD students or just anyone really in the research field, well, there is a natural link there with open source. It always will be, right? So how can we do that? And I think it is important that we are very, very close to these communities, making sure that they have the right open source tools to also, to build what they are doing, and understand that sometimes, just sometimes, the quality of the software that they're building might not be excellent, but the vision and the ideas behind the research are. So we have to be very empathetic about that. But yeah, this is a very important topic because it is probably one of our few advantages at the moment.
Pablo.
And if I may add to what Pablo just said, there's a number of very interesting initiatives that try to embody the open source way of working in academic research. So for example, the Journal of Open Source Software is run by volunteers basically, and all the reviews happen in the open on GitHub pull requests basically. And they do a great job at moving this research software forward and try to make a positive impact at a very low cost. So there's some blog post that runs the numbers that are needed to run the journal, and it's possibly the cheapest journal in the world at the moment, which makes the other academic journals pale in comparison.
I mean, I was going to ask as a follow-up, maybe Andreea is a really great person to answer this. Linux famously was able to bootstrap itself by people working on computers on their own. The hardware was relatively accessible. That accessibility is really difficult with AI in terms of the infrastructure that's needed. How do you think we might be able to, as an open source community, accelerate and get the experience that we need to become experts in this as just normal open source community people?
I think there is a bit of a misconception. In order to get started with AI, you don't need that many resources. And nowadays, just a laptop can be enough. And I'm not saying that you'll run your project in production with that, but to get started, to begin your journey, to see if you like it or not, you don't need that many resources. At the same time, if we look at the core of open source, which enable us to contribute to make things better, I think we actually save a lot of resources and we benefit from having different people bringing different angles and doing different parts of the machine learning lifecycle in order to actually accelerate or leverage more the capabilities that each one of us has. And it goes into hardware, infrastructure, capabilities, like skills that we have as well.
I mean, I don't know if there's anything you could say about what Canonical might be doing or what we might be doing at Ubuntu to help people get access to AI resources.
Sure. Even if I don't want this to be a...
No, but I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we were talking about this with Pablo and Penpot, how it's interesting to know what it's open source at the end of the day, and it's accessible to people.
And it's quite nice because I was at the summit yesterday when someone told us, hey, I watched your webinar and now I'm like playing with large language models using also your tools. So in Canonical, we package open source tools that are designed for MLOps in order to simplify their activities, but also to run the entire machine learning lifecycle. Why does it help? Well, on one hand, because it's easier to get started. We have some analysis that we deploy the Kubeflow, for example, in 10 to 15 minutes, whereas the upstream can be more difficult. But at the same time, we enable capabilities such as upgrades and updates, which in the upstream are not there. And if I look at how much you can run on a laptop, well, it really depends on what laptop you have, but I do have colleagues who do that as well, and is there just work laptop?
Oh, thank you. I don't know, I mean, I had Frank's discussion yesterday about Nextcloud. You were talking about setting up the APIs for accessing ChatGPT, and was it the University of Helsinki's?
Yeah, yeah, we have integrated like SaaS solutions, ChatGPT, but this is actually more like a, I don't know, like a demo. We're really betting on locally running, completely open source, independent AI systems, and we put a lot of resources into it. We have a dedicated team working on that, and this is something which just really was interesting the last few months, because as I said earlier, like a year ago, everybody thought, well, this ChatGPT is just this proprietary bubble and no one knows what's going on. And nowadays, a lot of tools, or most of the tools are available, packaged for Ubuntu, of course, from the software perspective, but also training data. There's a lot of training data freely available, a lot of models can be used, and you can really do a lot, like locally on a laptop, as mentioned. I mean, the only thing that is a bit critical, if you really want to build your own large language model from scratch, then you probably need, not probably, you need a lot of GPU power. But even that is getting easier all the time. So, yeah.
But I would like to add something here. We should not all aim to build our own LLMs. It makes no sense and it's a waste of resources. So we would rather take open source LLMs and optimize them for our use cases, not to build our own.
And just a quick addition to that, I think it's important to know that the OSI, the open source initiative, is still figuring out what open source means in the context of AI models in general, right? Because for code, it's very simple. Like if you can see the code with a license, then it's open source and that's it. But for models, what if you don't have the training data, for example, or if you don't know how the reinforced learning was conducted and so on? So there are like many other factors. And I think they're actively, as we speak, trying to figure out what open means in this case. So we're talking about it very broadly, but the definitions are still in progress.
What do you, I mean, do you see many people on WSL, for example, experimenting with, I don't know, Linux-based AI?
For sure, we do. And a lot of Linux tools are used for AI development, for fine-tuning, etc. And so I think tools like the Windows subsystem for Linux allow it to be able to be used on Windows. And then also when you talk about access to AI models, the other cool stuff that Microsoft's done we've added Llama to. So we worked with Meta to open source the Llama large language model, and you can actually download that and fine tune it exactly to Andrea's point of you can specifically modify that for your application. So I think that there is an industry trend of open source as a powerful tool of getting these LLMs to people to be able to run locally, no matter what platform you're on.
Going back perhaps to, sorry Frank, do you want to say something?
No, I just want to add something quickly. I would be a bit careful with calling Llama open source, because it is, for me, it's like free as in beer, but not free as in freedom. You can download it and use it, but it's like a binary, basically, right? You can use it, but you cannot really look inside how it actually works. So for that, the training data would be needed in other things. So, yeah.
I was actually going to say, following up on what Juan said about licenses and the OSI and still investigating things, how fit for purpose do you think the licenses that we have are for dealing with, well, firstly the training data, but also the data sets that you've got when we share them and where the data, the sets have come from?
No, they're not suited at all. Actually, I do believe that current open source licensing is not suited at all for open source. So I think since I have this perspective of that we need a new social contract in terms of how we share our data and how we contribute to the training data sets and all that. And I don't think the solution is just licenses, but it does help. It's a social contract that has some legal foundation, So unless we get something that is very clear, very obvious out there, we are going to be using like the old regime framework in terms of licensing and expectations, and there's not just, it's not ready, it's not suitable. It's just okay for the transition period, but I think we need a new framework, and that includes, for this new social contract, we do need new licenses. Yeah.
And on the topic of licenses, I'm very excited about the work that Hugging Face, the company, is doing, because they're pushing these Rails or responsible AI licenses that somehow embody the open source principle, but not quite, because they restrict for what things you can use the AI. So they have like a set of limitations on use cases and things like that. And I think that puts us in a very interesting debate. You know, like we want to. Do we want to make the AI only for the good, so to speak, or we want to preserve the neutral freedom that the open source licenses embody? You know, I think that's a very interesting debate.
I think that as much as we like to think that AI is going to be used only for the good, and as much as there are many people who say AI is, I don't know, taking over the world, the truth is that it's very difficult to control what's happening and how it is being used, and at the same time, it's so quickly evolving that I think that regulations and even guidance on the topic feels a bit slow. However, that is not something that is the first time when it's happening in the world. Any new innovation came with exactly the same challenges, and in the end of the day, society found a way to make it work.
And let's not forget that technology is not neutral. Technology is not neutral at all. So why AI should be? It's what you do with technology, it's what the technology you build, the technology that you don't build, that has an agenda. But technology is not neutral. It's that's something that we sometimes think as people coming from science. Science is neutral. Technology is neutral. Not really. You know, why? What are you building? Why are you building that? What are you not building? That has an impact. So I think sometimes when we have these discussions, you could replace AI just using the word technology, and it just basically works too. So yeah, totally agree that it's not the first time this is happening.
For sure. And I think one of the biggest reasons that you do licensing as a maintainer of an open source project is sometimes there's definitely like an MIT license, there's an aspect of that of, I am not legally responsible for your usage of this. And I think one of the challenges is AI is so unpredictable. If you put out a training set, if you put out data or an AI model, you don't know necessarily what it's going to do in every case. For example, Google had a great ethics paper about how face detection AI had a significant racial bias. And it detected white males very well, but for African-American females, it had like a 50% failure rate, which they didn't realize until much later, and people were already using some of these models. And so I think I totally agree. I think there's the power of this is, it is a powerful tool that can have some unintended consequences. Like other pieces of technology, we're going to figure out, hey, I'm going to make sure that this is used responsibly, etc.
But it also has intended consequences. So, for example, the way you look at how big companies like, again, sorry, Microsoft and Google and others are developing these systems, this is not just accident that happens here. There's a strategy behind it. Right? There's a strategy to monetize that and to have vendor login and other not so nice consequences. And I totally agree that technology is not neutral. And I think this is in the core of the open source free software movement, that we actually have ethics and we have some goals like actually improving IT for the whole world, not just for some big companies. And that's something we should always realize and we should work on and to make the world better.
Oh yeah, I'd love to talk about ethics, because I agree, like it is kind of scary. Work for Microsoft, it's a huge company, we're doing lots of AI stuff. You know, how do you guarantee ethics in AI? How do you use AI responsibly? And speaking personally as someone, like I'm developing AI features for developers, we have a very rigorous step to go through. And part of those are considering, you know, what could this AI say does this AI have any significant biases? What harms could it have? Because I agree it is a scary space, and like a large language model like a ChatGPT or a chat experience, there's a high level of unpredictability, and how do you kind of protect users themselves, their data, etc.? It's a tough problem.
I mean, touched on briefly there, one of our questions was about bias, and we discussed this yesterday actually briefly, but I know that open source shouldn't have more of an obligation, but we have perhaps more agency to change things in terms of bias of models, the input and the output. Have you any thoughts on what we could do to make that an action rather than just an idea?
Well, transparency. You really should know what's going on, and we as open source community, we usually have that, right? You have the source code, you can run it locally, you really know what's going on. With lots of those AI systems, you have no idea what's going on. Right? GPT-4 is a complete black box. Copilot too. No one knows what's really behind that, and that's a big problem. So we really need like more transparency, what these big companies are doing there, and like really opening up completely with the training data and the algorithm behind it, and only then I think it can be trusted.
Do you think?
I'll say you have to be transparent about your bias, because I'm very biased. I'm super biased. I'm super pro open source. That's a bias. But I'm transparent about that. Yeah. So you can have both. You can be transparent and you can be biased. But people have to know.
Maybe linked to this as well. Do you think it's possible for us to incorporate attribution in some meaningful way?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's a super difficult technical problem, right? There's a talk that I attended at PyCon Estonia a couple of months ago by David Mertz, who is working on an attribution framework for AI in general. So how a system can tell you in some form of structured metadata where did it derive the different sources of information. And I think this would be a dream come true to have, to be able to say, okay, so I'm getting this text or getting this image, and I drew information from these 10 writers or 10 artists, because obviously, like every single point of the data, the training data is going to have a contribution, but there's going to be some major points there, Then how do we do that? I think it's an open question for now. And the truth is that I think it's a really difficult problem, but we should not be scared at difficult problems. Like we can, if we think it's a thing worth doing, let's just try to do it.
I would actually like to challenge this, because as much as the idea is good and it would help a lot of developers or some areas of the business, I think as an end user, I might not want to know all those things because I want a quick answer, a seamless experience. And then if someone bombards me with a lot more information that I asked for, I might just feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we have to differentiate like end user products from how the system works. So you can store that information, for your own analysis later on. That doesn't mean that you have to present it to the user.
This is actually a question that Andreea proposed. How do you think AI is going to influence, in the long run, other industries?
It's very interesting because yesterday I was talking to Juan about the impact of AI in general, and I think there are different angles to look at it. On one hand, I think it will become a commodity. Nowadays, we look at it, oh, there is this new feature that has AI, but we ignore that online stores, for example, they have been using AI for a long time. We benefit from it, and we don't even realize nowadays that, oh, it uses AI. I think it's going to happen similarly with a lot of other industries. At the same time, there are going to be capabilities or aspects that it's very hard to predict how are going to change. And it requires also us to adapt quickly to all those changes.
So I'm firmly Team Star Trek, which is very positive about AI. And I think speaking for developing software, I feel very positive and optimistic that it's going to supercharge basically the ability to get something of an idea in your head to an actual website or an application or something. Which is awesome, because like, how many people do you know where they're like, I have this great app idea and I need you to code it for me? You know, them having that person to be able to be just develop their idea themselves without necessarily knowing, you know, C++, freeing pointers, etc. I think is a huge benefit. And so I'm hoping that it basically opens the world of development to a lot of people who might not have been able to step into that before.
I think I can give an example, a recent example we learned at Penpot, exactly around that topic. For a year, a company had been developing a Penpot fork, a vertical. Penpot is a design tool, and they had been building an e-commerce website builder on top of Penpot. They didn't know Clojure, which is the language that we use at Penpot, but they didn't care. They just used ChatGPT, and they learned Clojure. They created the fork, and they now have a business on top of a Penpot fork using ChatGPT-powered Clojure development. What? Like Penpot, we always thought Penpot as a platform would come like next year, but so soon, that was amazing. And at the same time, I want to say that this is the a beginning. This diffusion models and LLMs are not just the whole of AI. In my opinion, this is a low-hanging fruit. This is like the initial steps. There are many, many challenges out there that where diffusion models or LLMs are not equipped. Okay, and so we have to see more of these kind of revolutions or changes at scale, which is what all of this is about, right? It's the scale that really scares with other models. So AI didn't begin with diffusion models and LLMs, won't end with this. So you know, we have to keep thinking. Okay, this is just longer-hanging fruit. The future is yet to come.
And one thing I'm somewhat concerned in the future is that being treated by a human is going to become a luxury. So if we think, for example, of healthcare, I think there's a very clear incentive for especially public healthcare systems, right, to replace parts of their system with AI, like chatbots that reply to you when you're sick or you feel unwell and so on. And I think we're going to create like two tiers, right? Like one that is answered by a chatbot, which is basically for free. And then if you pay a surplus, then you can get treated by an actual human. And I'm not sure what the consequences of that are going to be, but I think it's a very clear direction we're getting.
I would like to follow up on this because I think we have to bear in mind that AI is not going to be adopted across all industries, all geographies, all cultures at the same time. And whereas some companies or some people are more open to AI, some others are not. And in the long run, we will see this also when we analyze the adoption of AI. There are cultures that are just more engaged with other human beings, so likely they will not want to talk to robots in a hospital. But maybe there are others that they don't mind, and that's fine as well. We don't have to push at the same time everywhere just because it's there and it's possible.
I think this is a big topic, but I mean, maybe to start with, in terms of designers or artists, their work is going to change. How can we ensure that the benefits of AI are felt by the largest majority of people rather than perhaps benefiting just a few?
For sure. So I agree. AI, you can see an immediate impact to art with Stable Diffusion or to music. And I actually really agree with Billy Corgan's opinion, who's the front singer for Smashing Pumpkins. He did an interview where he said that AI is really exciting for him as a musician because he described his way of making music was analog, which was him in his basement with a guitar figuring out 10,000 riffs over 15 years. And now with AI, he would be able to see those riffs immediately. And he said that his form of creation was discernment, right? He's choosing his vision in his head of what the song should sound like, and he's discerning over what it is. And it just so happened that the AI created the riffs for him to discern, or he created them himself with his guitar, was a detail, like an implementation detail to him. So I think it will change, and people are going to have different experiences. But I think that there is an opportunity of, hey, you'd be able to see so much more. People will be able to create so much more, even though it might be an AI creating it initially. It's a human discerning it and pulling it together to get their vision at the end of the day.
I think this is a bit of a short-sighted view, to be honest. In the future, like, everybody can, in 5 minutes, create a Smashing Pumpkins song, which is based on the awesome work of some real artists, right? Which has the effect. And by the way, there's not only music, this is like emails, concept marketing, websites, applications, everything, right? Which lead to a flood of content based on the work of humans. Right? Which then will lead to an effect that no one really has time to listen to all these songs and visit all these websites and reading all these PDFs anymore, because it's just too much. And then you need like AI again to summarize it for you, right? to select the good songs from all the billion songs that are published every second, right? And then we have a situation where the whole question about bias is so huge, because then we live in a world where machines that are completely intransparent, like these proprietary AI systems, deciding what we consume and how it looks like. Then we have this gigantic filter above our whole life, which is done by proprietary systems controlled by big companies where we have no idea how they decide what goes into my life.
Craig's example is one of those where you could replace AI with just technology, I guess, right? I think this, for designers and in general, for anyone looking at this, behind the scenes, there's this tension between commoditizing and empowering. And I think designers are looking at that with concern. Am I going to be commoditized more than I'm going to be empowered? And when you have this massive ability to level up the playing field for everyone, it's hard to not go with that, because, okay, perhaps you will get commoditized, your work as a designer or an artist, or even as a developer, but other people can then now become a developer, because they can, the onboarding process is so much easier. So that is the tension always, commoditization versus empowering. And it is a very personal perspective. The tension is out there, but what is your angle? And so, yeah, we see that at Penpot, because we are a designer tool. And the way we see this, the kind of the solution is, please, we need developers. I'm a developer myself. We need developers to not just by the strength of numbers take over the designer world, just because it's so great to automate everything, to scale up everything. To no, this is much more complex to just very quickly solving the problem of design, because I can do it in no time. So I think that is a very tangible tension that we feel, when you're doing an open source design tool. How can we have both designers and developers working together as allies and not commoditizing each other?
And on top of what you already said, I think it's really important to insist on the concept of consent. There was this assumption that because something was available on the internet, someone could take it and make it part of a huge data set, right? And I think nobody was ready for that. Like when I was, writing tutorials online or uploading my drawings, I was not thinking that someday I would be part of a training body of an AI, So there has been some mechanisms in place now for artists, for example, to remove their artwork from training datasets. But first, from what I've heard, I think it's a nightmare. And second, it's not really that effective, right? In a sense, like the harm is already done. So I think we have to think about these things up front. Like, do I consent for my work to be part of this training corpus? And then, this might seem like a silly thing, but I think it was this week that Scarlett Johansson is suing some company because they trained a model with her voice and face, and they made an advertisement with her and without her consent, And I think all of this is rooted in the idea that, sure, because it's there, you can take it and just use it, you know? And I think it's really important that we insist a lot on that, because not because something is there online, I can, you know, like watch 3 or 4 videos of myself even, and then start pretending that Juan loses things that he's not supposed to be saying.
But I think this goes into a broader topic about education about AI, and it is how do we educate developers to use and to build projects using AI that are actually, that care about all these concerns, but also users or even early enthusiasts who are just, I don't know, building their own data set or take a random data set from the internet without even checking what's behind it. Is it allowed or not? Should you do it or not? And it really goes into a need that definitely we have to educate more on AI, not just to think, oh, I can build this cool project, but rather what's the impact, what are the consequences, what are the rights that any data source or model has.
Can I just, on the consent, open source developers understand consent because it's every day they're just consenting several rights to other people. So they are familiar with this idea of consent. I think other people, perhaps designers, just because of their background, are not so familiar with consent. And I think open source and open licenses, perhaps not the ones that we have right now, but other, like going back to the social contract, should make designers, you know, want to consent. Like, yeah, I'll give you my work because I know this whole game theory is actually good for everyone. Like, this is a win-win. I'm not giving this away for nothing. I'm giving it for a greater good. Then I do this, but I know the rules. So particularly open source and open licenses are well equipped to think of a new consent mode for people that are not developers. So that's an opportunity there.
I agree. And I think there's also a lot of interesting parallels we can draw to analog, where there's a lot of solutions for some of these problems. For example, ChatGPT and other text generation AIs, you can ask it things, but you're not necessarily sure where the answer came from, or image generation, you're not sure where that came from. And there's been steps in that space for people to do footnotes, right? Like when you read a book and they make an outrageous claim, they'll footnote it, so you know you can check the source. And I think we're stepping more towards that direction of, hey, what tools can we build into this so that people actually have the confidence in this, they can understand where it came from, what safety and responsible mechanisms can we build into AI. And there's a lot of parallels to analog existing mechanisms for that. Exactly to your point, Frank, of there's a lot of scary things that could happen. I think I feel a bit better personally on it of, we've seen a lot of these problems before of artists, taking other people's work, or someone making outrageous claims in a book for false information, etc. How do we protect against that? I think that there's methods we can use that we can apply to AI.
Yeah, I think there's just a different level. I mean, sure, you can say, yeah, this all existed before, it was fine, so it will be fine again. I'm not really sure. With the example with Scarlett Johansson, right, you could make the point that Photoshop existed before. Sure, this was possible before AI with just Photoshop, but the work that's needed is just on different dimension. Now everybody can do it, which means it will happen like 1 billion times all the time. And I think the scale of it really makes a difference. You cannot really say, oh, it's just the same as a book. It's just the scale is completely different.
I will ask a more positive question in a second, but listening to what you're all talking about, I was thinking that maybe, especially when there's a generational shift, young people today are quite happy to share their location on Snapchat with all their friends. Gmail has been scanning our emails for decades. Have we desensitized almost a generation to your data being taken and being used for models? And how is there a way as an open source community we can counteract that without putting ourselves at a severe disadvantage in terms of progress? And then I'll ask a more positive question.
Yes.
I agree as well. I think that there's, there's scary ramifications of that, of your example of you have videos of yourself online and so do I. people can take those videos and they can make 3D, an AI video of you doing something else, right? Like an artificial video of you. That's not something I necessarily intended or thought about or even knew would happen when I put videos of myself online. And so I think there are, the data that we've put out online is going to be used in unintended ways. And so I think that is a real concern.
Yeah, like 100% with you, Craig. And on top of what you already said, I don't think we're desensitized. It's just that we're very ignorant of what are the consequences of like sharing our data online and so on. I like to say that, some people say that some social networks where you're anonymous are very dangerous because anonymous people do crazy shit, right? And I don't think that's actually true. It's like, in general, lack of consequences that make people do crazy shit. If you frequent LinkedIn, for example, where people put the full name and where they work on and so on, people say all sorts of crazy things online for everybody to see, and they don't care, and they're not anonymous at all. So I think, in general, it's not a matter of people young or old. It's just that there's this super open feedback loop in which we're sharing things online for a very long time, and we have no idea how this is going to come against us, basically, because technology moves much faster than our own intuitions about all these things.
I don't think our brains have evolved to cope with this, to be honest. I think we are in this point in evolution where it's just too much, So we need to be enhanced to deal with the enhanced world. And probably the key ingredient is to have a positive correlation. All this has to have a positive correlation with critical thinking. If you achieve that, then, okay, transhumanism, okay, a positive transhumanism. Typically, it's not positive, I know, transhumanism, it doesn't look like, but you can think of today as a bit of a transhumanism, right? Not posthumanism, but at least trans. And I think we have to be aware that probably in the next couple of decades, everyone's going to understand that just our brain, it's just not enough. The consequences, the prediction of what is going on, the amount of data that I have to analyze, inform decisions for every aspect of my life. It's just an enormous amount of energy are required to be disciplined, to just always think and probably overthink things. So I really want cyber implants pretty soon, open source cyber implants, of course, to give me that boost so that I can keep applying my critical thinking to whatever is coming.
I think we have this already. I think it's called a smartphone. Smartphone is an interesting device, right? It's like glued to our hand, first of all. It's basically implanted, I think, nowadays. Second is, this is a device that controls our access to all information. So on LinkedIn, for example, we don't read all messages. We read the messages that the nice app on our phone shows us, which is decided by some magical AI system running somewhere else who knows how it works. Gmail is not showing us all mails. There's a spam folder and there's a priority inbox. Another awesome AI system deciding what I'm reading and what I'm not reading, and so on and so on. And I think we already live in this world, and I'm actually quite scared of it because this is not transparent what's going on there.
Sorry, I've spoken too much, but if I may add like one positive thing on top of what you're saying, I think, I don't think any of these systems were created with an evil purpose, like all of these magical decision taking on behalf of the users and so on were born as a way to make our lives easier in the first place, right? So I will show you only a filter of your LinkedIn posts so that you can see what's more interesting to you, or that you can spend more time here and give me more money for advertisement, right? But the fact that they were not born with an evil purpose in the first place doesn't mean that they don't have evil consequences, So I think we have to balance all this time, like we're putting this system in place to make our lives easier. What other consequences does it have?
I think it's a balance there. Whereas it makes our lives easier, it also can challenge us to be more disciplined, to go the extra mile for what we actually need, and maybe educate ourselves on how do we use technology in general. It's very easy to look at the negatives or at the positives only, but at the end of the day, they both exist, and they always did with any other innovation. You can use cars to go from point A to point B, or you can use cars to, I don't know, hit someone while they're crossing the street. It doesn't mean that we don't use cars anymore. It means that we are more cautious on how to use cars.
There's a fantastic book called Weapons of Math Destruction, which talks about exactly that. Of we use mathematics in a lot of those ways. Of, you know, for example, BMI is a great general tool of determining a population's health as what it was designed for. It falls apart when applied to one human specifically, and so I agree more than ever. The weapons of math destruction and how that applies to AI is becoming more and more apparent.
We actually only have a few minutes left, and I thought it'd be good to end on something that's hopefully a bit more positive. I mean, considering the rate of change in something like Mid-Journey output over the last couple of years, would anybody be willing to make a guess of what the state of MI or ML might look like in 5 or 10 years?
I think this is very difficult because 5 years ago, I don't think any of us could have thought of a ChatGPT that gets 1 million or 1 billion users in less than a week. I think it's similar now. We can assume things or we can think of things. Yes, I think there are going to be more regulations on the market. I think it's going to be in more industries adopted and so on. But how it's going to look like? I think it depends on what do we decide to focus on in the short term, on the positives or on the negatives.
I will answer to a slightly different question, and I'm going to say how I would like for it to look like in 5 years. You know, there's a beautiful theater play in Spanish that has an anarchist character that says that the machines are going to do all the work and we don't have to work anymore, right? And this was written at the beginning of the 20th century. 100 years on, there's more and more technology and more automation, and I keep working extra hours every single day, you know? So something is slightly off, and I think, you know, I'm a super privileged person to be doing what I'm doing, and lots of other people don't have as much luck as I do have. So in the future, I would love to fulfill this dream of the machines doing the boring things for us, and then we do the art, not ChatGPT and not Stable Diffusion, but we get to do the drawings and the artistic things and so on, and we have a lot of leisure time. So that's how I would like it to be.
I think software development is an art as well.
That sounds like kind of a modern slavery to me. I think I sometimes feel like it's 1996 and we're getting asked, what do you think internet is going to do with the world? And it's like, depending on the company you're in, like you have different bets. I think it's going to be a function of what it gets prioritized, you know, what the privileged people prioritize really, and how accessible the whole set of resources is. You know, how compute power, software, whatever, how accessible that is, so that we can have a balanced environment. And my take, is not going to change much. We're going to have the same status quo. I don't see, like in 5 years, I don't see like massive changes in the sense that we'll continue to have this arms race, but averaging out, everything averaging out, it's going to be pretty similar as to what it is today, which is bad.
So I think it's a really interesting year. I mean, most of us, I think we read the article beginning of the year from this tech journalist from the US who had this story chatting with ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT fell in love with him, right? And really acted not like just some assistant that's writing a nice email, but like a person, which immediately got super scary for everybody, obviously. Then the reaction of the tech giants was they basically limited the power from these AI systems by now by limiting the number of prompts that can be referenced on top of each other, basically artificially limiting the sort of the memory of the systems, so that cannot happen anymore. And this is then the state was the state for the last few months. But this is an artificial limitation, so these systems are already a lot more scary than we see them at the moment. And I think this will be unlocked at some point again by the companies themselves or by some others, where you really have a chat system that are really basically no longer distinguishable from humans, right? Passing the Turing test. And then imagine just applying some other technologies that already exist, maybe putting text to speech and speech to text to it, that you can really talk with this chatbot, which has these emotions, and then maybe adding a screen to it, which has a face. This moves the mouse, same as the voice comes out. And then imagine someone puts this on top of a robot that's rolling around or walking around your home. And I find it actually quite fascinating that this didn't happen yet, because this is super possible today. And the reason for that is that I think these tech giants, they realize that the outcry, that the regulations will be insane once everybody will see how this actually could work. Right? And I think that the tech industry is at the moment in a waiting state, where they're trying to actually slow down the process artificially, because they're afraid of regulation. And I think this will, in one way or another, this will happen in the next few years.
I can see where you're going with that, and I think the answer will probably be giving those things a 4-year lifespan. I think, do you want to say something, Greg?
Oh yeah, I was going to say, for mine, I'd actually venture a guess in the next few years, I think the biggest impact will be the level of access to information. ChatGPT is, kind of changed the game for AI for a lot of people because of how quickly and creatively it could give info. It can pass, like the LSAT and the MSAT and other tests. I think refining how the safety around what information it can give, because it can also create fictional answers. But we're already seeing it with things like creating that project that you described, where those people did not know that language, but they quickly utilized an expert. That expert happened to be AI instead of a person to create something. I think that's probably the most exciting thing. Of you would be able to get access to these experts. Like, what could you do as a person if you had access to an expert on C++? What language, what projects could you create? I think that's probably the most exciting and where I hope to see AI go in the next couple of years.
Thank you. I feel like with all the things that we've discussed, we've barely scratched the surface, and we could almost have sessions in each of those questions. But thank you very much for the time, and thank you for everyone for coming.